I know almost everybody in the room, so that means this can be a relatively informal gathering. We're all friends here. You can get up and get something to eat, get some hot apple cider or water as Mayor Riley's talking. Just, enjoy yourself. Please try to eat everything on the table that Mayor Riley's not eating right now. So for the few of you I don't know, I'm Matthew Phillips. I teach law and ethics here in the business school, and I'm the director of the Wake Forest Center for the Study of Capitalism, which focuses on issues of professional identity and the market context of business. And one of the important areas of market context that we don't talk about a lot is local government and municipal effect on businesses and the relationships that go both ways between business and government. So I can't imagine someone better to talk about that than today's guest. So 100 years before Moravians settled down the road in Salem, we think this is an old city, but 100 years earlier, the new city of Charleston, South Carolina, was already growing into one of the most important ports and commercial centers in North America. While no longer among the largest, it's still one of the most welcoming and interesting cities on the continent. Charleston has grown into a thriving modern city while preserving its historic homes, churches, and other spaces, not to mention its charm. What manner of person must it take to lead such a city? Indeed, is it possible to imagine that one person would be so successful as the city's mayor that he would be elected to 10 consecutive terms? That incredible fact suggests the depth of character, creativity, and integrity of the person who achieved it, Joseph Patrick Riley, Jr. A Charleston native, that's a big deal in Charleston, Mayor Riley graduated from the Citadel and the University of South Carolina School of Law. He served in the South Carolina House of Representatives for 6 years and then ran for mayor of Charleston, taking office for the first time in 1975. Under his leadership, Charleston increased its commitment to racial harmony and progress, achieved a substantial decrease in crime, experienced a remarkable revitalization of its historic downtown business district, supported the creation and growth of Spoleto Festival USA, added significantly to the city's park system, developed nationally acclaimed affordable housing, and experienced unprecedented growth in population. Since leaving office, Mayor Riley has served as professor of American government and public policy at the Citadel, where a professorship has been endowed in his honor. His legacy is seen in downtown projects to make the city a thriving commercial and tourist destination, including Charleston Place, in Charleston's recovery from the devastating Hurricane Hugo in 1989, during which his leadership garnered national praise, and the unique and sustainable character of one of the most livable cities in the United States. But he'll tell you first about another feature of his legacy, the International African American Museum, to be built on the site of Gadsden's Wharf, a center of slave trade in the 18th century, deemed ground zero of the African American experience by Henry Louis Gates. Led by Mayor Riley, during and after his time in office, the museum and its site is developing into a critical window into the history of Charleston and South Carolina. He's dedicated himself to making the museum a reality, and it's planned to open its doors in 2020. It's my pleasure to introduce one of the most respected city leaders in the United States, Mayor Joseph Riley.
Well, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, for your kind introduction and for your invitation. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I know most of you are business students. I'm going to be talking about the building and rebuilding of a city, and we'll touch upon business development, economic development, historic preservation, design, livability, community pride, spirit, and fiscal health of a city all together. It's a creative act, the building and rebuilding of a city, and all of the demands and responsibilities of being engaged in any form of business or economic development activity came to the fore in my work there. So the pictures will be behind me, which is very nice because you don't have to look at me, the pictures are much better, I can assure you. Charleston was a very old American city. It was built long before the automobile and the elevator, a city of beautiful historic buildings that were preserved by the first historic preservation movement in America, and a city of a lovely scale and antiquity, but it's not a city where anything is preordained. It's a real live old American city filled with all the opportunities for great success and failure. This was a failure. This was the demolition of the Stark Charleston Hotel, where the National Democratic Convention of 1860 met. Beautiful, historic building, but city leaders in the 50s knew to be a great city, you didn't need old hotels, you needed a drive-in motel. So they tore that down and built a drive-in motel. So in city building, in any form of business development, kind of rule number one is don't make any mistakes. They proved to be costly. So that's what we worked, try to avoid mistakes. And started the city when I took office in '75, had been declining, losing population, losing tax base. Back in the 70s, people had been fleeing the cities, going to the suburbs, and cities were in real, quite desperate situations. So we started working, as you should, in the most difficult areas. You got to fix that first. What is the sickest? And the sickest was the inner city residential areas. We had lots of vacant lots. I was determined to build new affordable housing in these vacant lots. We wanted places for people of modest resources to live and continue to reside in those neighborhoods. So this is what houses look like in that part of the city, but this is what they built for affordable housing in the 50s and 60s. Ugly as the dickens, set back from the street, no relationship to the neighbors, usually put a cyclone fence around to kind of warn you it was unsafe, and nobody in the right mind should want to live there anyways. We were determined to build attractive affordable housing, got hired a young architect, and that's what he built. It looked like the old buildings, but it fit in beautifully, showed you could build attractive affordable housing. So then we got a grant from the federal government to build a new housing project. And this was early in my time as mayor, before all of you were born, in the late 70s. And so the Housing Authority knew just where to put the new housing project. And they were so excited. I said, tear down a few buildings here, a few buildings there. I said, no, we're not going to build any more housing projects. These efforts, well-meaning, failed to crowd a bunch of poor people in these monolithic complexes and don't get mad they don't work. So we're going to scatter the public housing on vacant lots in the city. So the Housing Authority thought I had lost all of my marbles, but I insisted, and so we started picking the sites. And, you know, the job of mayor, among other things, is leadership. And so the people in the neighborhoods where the vacant lots existed really weren't excited about public housing going there. You know, it's not like people wake up tomorrow and say, boy, it'd be great if we get us public housing next door. So we had to work through those controversies. And then we picked the architects, told them what we wanted. They came up with their design, ugly as the dickens, fired them, and got new architects. So this is what we built, this scattered site public housing. Very poor people live there. Housing Authority owns it, but it fit in with the neighborhood. So rather than be a diminishing aspect of the neighborhood, it added attractiveness to it. People of all incomes live in the neighborhood, and that started a movement. Prince Charles, when he came to Charleston in the late 70s, the only photo op we wanted was in front of one of our scattered site public housing, because he said that is the best lesson historic Charleston, South Carolina could share the rest of the world, that you could build housing for people of modest resources and add to the beauty of a city. And they did. This was one of the ones we built. We were at the, I was at the reception at the president of the Citadel, our alma mater, and it was a cocktail party. And so it's the home of the president, crowded with people, you know, and so a server will bring the tray over and kind of, you know, get close, you not knock things over. And so the server kind of whispered to me. She said, Mayor Riley, I want to thank you. And I said, what's that for? She says, because Monday I'm moving into 7 Marion Street. It's one of these scattered site public houses. And she said, it's so beautiful. And I thought back then, when the norm was a housing project, that a tenant of a public housing didn't use the word beautiful before. And the fact of the matter is, in the business of city building, there's no excuse to cause anything built that doesn't add to the beauty of a city, because the city then becomes less successful and less livable. So this one right there was in a neighborhood that was run down. We've got that, that's public housing. And across the street, those started getting renovated. Mark private sector got involved because it was spirit and optimism about the neighborhood. Around the corner, vacant lot, market rate housing ran on there. Another around the corner, same spirit on, but this one building, two affordable housing apartments became a catalyst. Private sector, driven by the fact that the city had put a foot in the ground, this area didn't get into decline anymore, and that we're going to build attractive housing, in this instance for people of modest resources. We kept the bulldozer out. Very hard to do. Cost a lot of money to keep them, and it's easy to just say, get that falling down thing out of sight. It looks like the Dickens. And clean it out, which what a lot of American cities did. But when you do that, you erase some history, you erase some memories, you erase some texture, you erase some reality, and you're stuck with some same old normal stuff rather than the historic fabric of a city. So we kept the bulldozer out. We did lots of these. It's very expensive. We found the money to do it. Restored them for the people who lived in the neighborhoods so they could keep them, low interest loans, help them stay there. Some, were abandoned. We fixed them up, provided for affordable housing. We did a batch of these, and it changed the neighborhoods. It changed the neighborhoods, and it changed the public perception. And all of a sudden, people started moving in because it was okay. It's, it looks nice. And so we then had, do these quickly, this was what we call freedmen's cottages. It's what African Americans built after the Civil War when they could, for the first time, legally own property. One story of what we call a Charleston single house, most of which you've seen earlier. And so they were built, and then that neighborhood was being abandoned. And Hurricane Hugo came in at '89 and about wiped everything out. So that's what it looked like. But we got Habitat for Humanity to come in as a partner, and it was the first rehab initiative that Habitat had ever done. All their things were new. Habitat came in, worked with churches, restored those, and it preserved a building type. It's historic, that Freedom's Cottage, but it stopped the erosion of that neighborhood, and it started coming back. And then that the Freedman's Cottage form gave our young architect an idea. We've been trying to figure out how to design transitional housing, which is, we built a wonderful shelter for the homeless, great churches involved, one world-class, national class initiative, but we wanted a place where people could move that had been homeless, and the first kind of place that, on their own little unit, so we got those built, and won an award from the American Institute of Architecture for transitional housing. And for the scattered site public housing, the city received an award from President Reagan. The national government gave 11 awards for a 25-year period for initiatives that were in part funded with federal money. Bridge and Grandfather Mountain got one, whatever, Seattle Foot or prosthetic device, but Charleston Scattered Site Public Housing won an award from President Reagan. So then this was a story about corner lots. Now this was a building on a corner lot that I will admit to you was not in very good shape. And so the building official called me one day and said, Mayor, we got to let 17 fishermen come down, tear it down. I said, no, we're not going to do that. He said, Mayor, it's beginning to shift. And actually the utility pole is vertical, so the building was leaning a little bit. And I said, we'll get some money, fix it up. And he said, well, it's going to fall on the house next door and kill the people. And I said, well, it won't kill the people if we move them out. So we moved them out, got them, they stayed at the Holiday Inn for a few months. The kids had a swimming pool, thought I was terrific. And it was a corner lot, and we restored it. That's what it looked like in the back. But corner lots are very important because in a city, if you lose the corner, then it's like the virus got rid of that corner and that virus is going to spread. and get the next one. So we saved that corner, and now, and I should have a newer picture, but we've got a wonderful new neighborhood there. It's a mixture of affordable housing. Housing authority's got some buildings in there, first-time home buyer, market rate housing, all. But if we lost that corner, there would never have been any form of anchor, any kind of remembrance. These were going to be torn down by the Medical University to build parking garage. We got them to give it to us, moved them to a vacant lot, restored them. I noticed this tree growing out of the sidewalk in the street. I thought the tree was pretty cool. The tree is pretty cool. That's what the house looked under the street. Builder Fish wanted to tear that down, wouldn't let them. We restored it, changed the nature of the street. People started moving in. Well, the big challenge, other big challenge was the downtown. When I was a child on our main street, King Street, that was a shopping center of Lower South Carolina. It was bustling with activity. If you had a store on King Street, you would make a lot of money. And then is in the 50s and 60s, as suburban development grew in Charleston and people moved out of the center city, then the buying power moved out with them. And almost overnight, this lively space, the downtown, was almost deserted. When I was elected in December of 1975. I parked behind one of these buildings Saturday before Christmas to do my shopping. Now, that was actually Christmas Eve, which sounds like I'm a very bad husband, but my election was the 15th of December. I took office the 15th of December, so I really didn't have any time to do any Christmas shopping. But I parked behind one of these buildings and walked through the building as you did walk out onto the street to start shopping. And I walked out of the building and looked up the street. Christmas Eve, there was no one there. It was abandoned. So we started the challenge, addressing the challenge of declining downtown, and we did it by the numbers. First thing you do is develop a strategic plan. If you've got a complicated problem, if you haven't invested in a wise strategic plan, you will not solve the problem, whatever your problem is worse. So the strategic plan said we should try to restore some of the older buildings. We put some money in, restored buildings, wouldn't let them tear that down and fix it up. This building, Swartz building, looked like that, put some money in it, fix it up. Hugo knocked it down, put another one in there. But a big challenge was this. Right in the heart of our downtown was this big vacant lot. Now, when I was growing up, there were two department stores on that vacant lot, Belk and Penny's. They were gone, and you had this vacant lot on the heart of what had been the main shopping street of the city. And so we had to, the strategic plan said you needed a critical mass there. It couldn't be something diminutive, because what downtowns need is the energy of human beings occupying the area and using the street. So we needed to put a lot of stuff there. And it needed to be in a form residential. People stay there. Hotel is a form of that. We needed storefronts. I'll show you some more about that in a minute. And what we needed to do was to connect Market Street, which is the street that you can see with the red roofs that's perpendicular. King is the dogleg street. That was the main street going up. King Street was magic. Then Market Street is a street coming from your left, and Market Street was coming back a little bit. It was the old market, and it had a rough past. It was, kind of bawdy, and it once said that, and excuse me for this, but it was once said that Market Street was the only place in America that for 50 cents you could get a bowl of chili, a tattoo, or communicable disease. But anyway, Market Street has started coming back a little bit, and so what we had to do, we had to connect Market Street to King Street pedestrianly. And human beings do not walk past a vacant lot in an urban setting. It just doesn't feel good. and you're not going to do that. So we had to make sure that Market Street continued to move, people continued to move to King Street. That was what the strategic plan told us. So huge amount of money, very controversial, because a lot of people said we don't, back then, sparse occupation was more the norm rather than dense occupation. So putting a whole lot of stuff in that vacant lot, a lot of people had great unease about it, and we had lawsuits, very controversial. But we'd done the plan. We knew it was the right thing to do. So that's what it looked like before. We couldn't put something huge. It was out of scale, had to respect the buildings, respect the market hall, built like Faneuil Hall in Boston in the 1830s. And so that's what we had built. Respect the street line, respect the market, retail, storefront, scale not too big, and then the large part setback. Hotel, conference facility, retail, not an unusual formula, but it had to be high quality. And every detail in any business plan is important. The devil is in the details, and your success is in the addressment of the details. So one little detail was this. In the hotel, you see above me, you can see where the elevator tower would be right in the center. And you come down on the second floor, and there's a conference facility where you have banquets and conventions, and all of that. So if you come down the elevator or walk up one flight of stairs to go to the conference facility, the first space you would go to would be the pre-assembly space, where you have a cup of coffee before the meeting or convention or drink, something like that. So the developers wanted to make the pre-assembly space right as you came off the elevator. And I said, well, if you do that, then where's the kitchen area going to be? And they said, well, the kitchen area will overlook the street. And I said, but you can't do that. If you overlook the street, then that's no windows, phony windows. You got the mechanical operation on the street. Great cities always honor the street. If you could build a building on a street, you respected the street. You connected with the street. So I said, no, pre-assembly space got to be on the street. So they agreed with us. I mean, they didn't have any choice. It cost them more money. So rather than what they proposed, we had this. So it was looking out on the street. It's really nice. You know where you are. And then from the street, you look up, and you're connected with the civic activity. That's more spirited. It's something going on, and it's a public building. I mean, you got the convention's there, but it's a civic space. It's not, and so we followed the strategic plan, and probably 75 buildings in the heart of our downtown were restored by the private sector because the right catalytic agent with the attention to details had happened. So one day I was walking up the street after church to buy a New York Times, and I saw this fella walking towards me right, about where these gals are. And I knew him. He was married, retired, lived in the suburbs. At noon Sunday, walking by himself up the street, He's kind of nervous. I said, Harold, how you doing? You okay? He said, yeah. He said, I said, what you doing now? And I said, well, Edith and I went to early church, and she had some stuff to do around the house, and I just like to come down here to walk around because it looks so nice, and I'm so proud of it. And that's the goal, is to have that civic accomplishment people want to enjoy and celebrate their downtown again. Now, this was a office building that obviously got built, and but before it got built, there was an abandoned gas station. Now, this is right at the same place. That's a Market building, Market Street going down to King Street. So there was an abandoned gas station with a billboard above it. In downtown, it starts a billboard. And the billboard said, if you like Charleston, you will love Savannah. Now, that made you mad as the dickens anyway. It was ugly, and they understand the people of Savannah, so anything to get rid of the billboard, I would do that. So the guys came and said they wanted to build the office building. And I said, great. They said, we need to buy some land from the city. I said, great. I said, now, I want some storefronts along Market. She said, no, Joe, this is an office building. We don't want any mixed use. I said, well, not going to sell the property to you. I said, I want storefronts because I'm trying to keep people moving along Market Street. And you don't move easily past drapery-covered windows. So they later agreed. They later said it's the best idea they had because they get more money for retail. So you got this shop here like that, and this one here. These people were having a perfectly good time till I took their picture. They wondered what the world I was doing taking a picture, but they were looking at the jewelry. You look at the jewelry, and then you walk down, and you look at something else, and that's how you know, the great guy named William H. Hollywhite, he was a famous author, and then he was the first person that really zeroed in the 60s and 70s on how human beings use the downtown. And he said, you know, in 42nd Avenue in downtown Manhattan in the 60s and 70s, things were declining. But on Upper Madison Avenue, the stores were great. And he said because every 22 feet there's another storefront. So you have to see something go on to keep moving. So anyway, we got that done. And then I got Saks Fifth Avenue to build in Charleston. Oh my Lord, that was, you know, there was a vacant lot where they were going to get Saks to build a department store. And so they had great storefronts that they designed, and it was really terrific. I took these pictures, they're not very good, but across the street was this abandoned or closed theater. So we acquired the theater and did a deal with the developer. But I said, you know, it'd be nice if y'all put some storefronts on the side of the theater, because that's what it looked like. And they said, well, Joe, we can do that, but you know, it's kind of narrow sidewalk, so we'll probably just have to punch something in. So that doesn't work. You trash collection there, it's shady. No, it's not inviting. I said, what would it take to do a real storefront? He said, well, Joe, you have to widen the sidewalk. I said, well, that's no problem. I sent the note to folks, and I said, we need to widen the sidewalk on Market Street. And they very politely got back and said, Mayor, you know, if you widen the sidewalk, you'll have to narrow the street. And I said, well, you know, I went to the Citadel, and we learned about stuff like that. And so I figured that out, and I said, what will you have to do if you widen the sidewalk? They said, well, if you add 2 more feet on the sidewalk, you've got 2 less feet, so you got to have, I said, how wide will lanes be? He said, we got 9 feet lanes now, they have to be 11 feet lanes now, we got to be 9 feet. I said, well, that's no problem. So anyway, we got the 9-foot lanes. Now, what happened is, you can't see this very well, but see, we got real storefronts. And then there are trees, and it's nice pavement, and so often in the wrestling with the American city, the question was with the transportation people told me the beer truck wouldn't be able to illegally park if all you got is 9 feet. I said, what if we don't let the beer truck illegally park? You know, and so rather than design around the beer truck parking, design around the human experience, how it feels walking down a sidewalk with 2 feet more holding your kid's hand over that. And this is a terrible fire we had upper part of our Main Street. The lower Main Street, King Street was coming along, piece at a time. And then upper King Street was desperate. And then we had this fire. I got the call, went to the fire scene. The firefighters, they're so courageous. I mean, I thought the whole city was going to burn down. And they contained it to one building. And the next morning, that's what it looked like. Building official called me and said, Mayor, we got to let Bluestein building come down. Bluestein building come down. I said, no. Bluestein family built it. They'd immigrated, Jewish family immigrated from Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, built this building, Bluestein building, right on a corner, part of the street we're trying to revive. You take it down, and that virus would spread. It'd be a surface parking lot, kind of rubble-filled. So they couldn't do anything. So the city, I wouldn't let the building official tear it down. The city bought the facade, fixed it up, did a deal with the owner, and restored the building. But that one building, now Upper King Street is probably one of the hottest downtown scenes in the country right now. It's absolutely amazing. And but if we had lost that corner, we just wouldn't have had the possibility to do that. Then parking is very important, and so often in America back then, parking garages became so damaging to the street scene, and because they were harsh and and mechanical feeling, and so we had to get parking garage is built in this historic part of downtown because we were building a waterfront park. I'll show you in just a minute. And I told the architects, I said, now I want some parking garages that don't look like parking garages. And the architect was very nice, respectful, shade condescending, and he said, well, Mayor, you know, in architecture, form follows function, and the building's got to look like what it is. I said, no, I read about that. Louis Sullivan said that, great architect of Chicago. But I do not want this to look like a parking garage. I said, I want it to look like a building with closed shutters. It's got to be graceful. So they didn't want to do it. I finally got a police photographer to take pictures of buildings around town with closed shutters. He agreed to do it. We won an award from the National Endowment of the Arts. I don't know if the National Endowment of the Arts has ever given another award specifically for one building. Chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts came down for a big ceremony and all like that because he felt that we had showed the country that these structures that you need could obey the rules of beauty, attractiveness, order, and design. And your colleague actually, a firm, once practiced law in that building. So then, Charleston Place, where I showed you where the parking garage, where the pre-assembly space was, we needed a parking garage. This is what buildings look like. We could have ripped those down, but we kept them. Took the backs of the buildings off, put the parking, and then restored the buildings. The city owned, had to acquire some of those. One was kind of odd because one of the buildings we acquired had a valid lease. And it was a lease to a burlesque joint, a striptease joint. So for about a year, the city owned a striptease joint, which is very odd. The male members of the legal department insisted they had a duty to inspect that every night to make sure things were going on. I told them that was not necessary. But anyway, so that's what, after we built the parking garage, they look like. It's now, it's 4:30, people are standing in line to go into the restaurants. I took that picture because what I like there is that, and you can tell it's dated by the length, the lack of length of that guy's shorts, is that right after we did it, is that they're in charge. They're occupying that space on their terms. If we let the big parking garage go there out of scale, they wouldn't be in charge. They would be, you know, a porte-cochere and all kind of industrial, mechanical operations going on. Parking is behind, it looks very nice. We won awards for our parking garages and put trees and flowers in front of them. And then Charleston was built on the water. That's why it was settled. And the city leaders in the 18th and 19th century gave the edge of the water to the public. That's what great cities do. So we had our chance to succeed or fail. This on the water, right around the corner from what you saw, was where a big fire occurred in the 1950s. I was in Boy Scout camp. 20 miles away, the fire was so big you could see the smoke 20 miles away from Boy Scout camp. So it burned out all these piers, and it just, you had the burned out pilings and rubble-filled, scruffy stuff for 20 plus years. And then I was elected, and I had a couple willing to help us put a park there. And then a guy bought the land kind of from under us and was going to build the Venice of the Southeast. High-rise, gated, big tax space, and the city needed tax space. Nothing was going on. But we knew that what a great city would do, if it's a business analogy, what a great company would do, is you give that edge to the public and make it beautiful. So we threatened to condemn it. We ended up working out a deal. So we got designers figure out what it ought to be. Don't plop anything down in a city. It should feel natural. So got some of the great landscape architects in the country work with us. And that's what we designed. Simple waterfront park. It was controversial. Why do we need a park? Where do people go to parks? A lot of money to maintain, all like that. And that's what it looked like before we built it. And that's what it looked like when it opened. And it is the most love space in our city. And from an economic development catalyst standpoint, it has spirited development and land values around there to an amazing degree. And in designing a park, first thing you need to do, just like a business opportunity, is you got to figure out the purpose. What are you doing? What is this for? And so we decided, because every park has a different purpose. So figure that out. Go, what is this? So we decided that this park's purpose in a bustling, ever becoming more dynamic city should have a place of peace and repose for the people who live there and visit. So back then, all parks, you got to have retail, you got to have food, you got to have this. No. This could be a peaceful, reposeful, beautiful place that people occupy. We're not going to have any special events there. Have special events elsewhere, just a simple place. So that's what we did. It's won awards around the country and the world, and people love it. People live in Charleston, people who visit, people live downtown, people live in the suburbs. That's 4th of July. One of my favorite pictures, just the way people occupying it kind of on their own terms, and it again spirited great economic development, residential development behind it, and arts center. Then we started an ethic with that, because back then we weren't sure, and the ethic was every opportunity we have to give public access to the water, we should do. So piece by piece, we're putting a necklace around the city and other parts of the peninsula, other parts of the city that's priceless. Give the citizens a chance to water. And then Ports Authority is going to rebuild this, build a passenger terminal, so keep the public access along the water. Got a piece in front of a building, had an arm wrestle, and then the International African American Museum is going to go right there. And that's another whole lecture, but we're able to acquire the land where the wharf, the largest wharf in the colonies, and where more enslaved Africans set foot than any other place in America. And that's where the museum is going to be built. So luckily to have that, and then we've got the aquarium on the water, and every opportunity. And then we were going to build a ballpark, and we knew we should put it on the water. We had this landfill, and it was a complicated matter, controversial, of course, why you do this. They always had these controversies, but you had to, it was a democracy, you had to communicate. Mayors in sales, not in a sale of hawking something. It's in communicating to your customers, your citizens, your constituents, why this is in their best interest, and why, when this is done, they will be pleased and proud. Continued communication is essential. So the ballpark is adored, as great ballparks are. That public space, that's what you get a hot dog behind the first base. You look at it's like an observation deck at a national park. Almost finished, believe it or not. We got to take the question. So visiting is so important. So a new bridge was coming in on one end of the peninsula. No bridge there before, and we knew preservation dogs. They said you need a plan for Calhoun Street. That's the street where all this new activity. That's what it looked like. Plan said it should be, not junky uses. So they wanted to put a max sleep in. We acquired the land, got a library put there across the street. It was a vacant lot. Building addressed it. Francis Marriott Hotel was abandoned, closed. College was going to use it for a dorm. I said, no, Main Street's got to be a hotel. We put money in it. Got the hotel restored. That's what the buildings look like. And then restoration continued. And then we had this park that was right on King Street and Calhoun Street, Main Streets, that had never figured out what its purpose was. And there is, if you look at that park to behind me, to your upper right, there's like a one-story building, two-story building. And so we designed it, get great landscape architects, and just make it a great public space. So the one-story, two-story building you saw is now going to open this year, a $100 million hotel. Only 185 rooms. Probably per square foot, the finest hotel to be built in America, because a beautiful public space was created. And then across the street, an abandoned building is a $75 million hotel. We got flowers and fountains and arts and crafts, and it's another fabulous public space that the city enjoys Christmas. So I think I'm going to wrap this up. This is just about tourism management. We decided that we had to organize how people use the city. You can be overrun if you're not guiding it. I want to figure out, how do we want people to use cities? We came up with the nation's first tourism management plan so people use the city. This was an old railroad depot. It was abandoned. We did a deal, created a visitor center, put the visitor center there. And then I put a map under the floor. So you walk in. No, it was a diagram of the city and model of the city. So I wanted you to know that the city was human scale. It wasn't a great big space, so you could walk it. So you visit, you come to town, you know, you don't need your car. Because we wanted people to get out of their cars and go to the visitor center, and the buses bring them, and then, you know, walk, see there's a model, and then you walk across the street and get the trolley and ride around, leave your car, you know. And we've saved a lot of marriages by doing this. You know, honey, well, I told you not to park. It's one-way street, about to get killed. No, they leave the car and they drive, get on the trolley and go around, hold hands, buy something, you know, and have a really great time. So I'll just wrap up with this because I want to hear questions. But this is a Borough's liquor store where I go very infrequently. But I went there one day to buy a booze for a staff party we were having. And the interesting liquor store in that back then they all wore pistols. And they don't have jackets on, so I mean they got a holster pistol, you know, you come in there, so it's kind of interesting. And so I walked in there one day and I knew those guys growing up, and they said, kind of converged behind the counter, which makes them nervous, because usually when people converge behind the counter, they might be upset about something, you know, and so what do these guys want to talk to me about? Well, we had this ugly-looking street intersection. We were running a water line. A friend of mine said, why don't y'all plant something? We got the plan to plant it. So that's what it looked like before. And then we did the planting. So it looked like. So the guys in the liquor store, one guy said, Joe, you know what you did down there at Rutledge and Broad? I said, yeah. He said, that is the prettiest thing I ever saw. Another guy leaning on his pistol said, Joe, you know where I live, don't you? And I said, yeah, I really did it, but I mean, you know, I didn't want to make you mad. And he said, yeah. And he said, I drive 2 miles out of the way going home just to go by there every night, you know. And they didn't want to talk about the big tree. But the point is that citizens, you create something in the city that adds to the beauty. They own it. It enhances their sense of pride. And so all of these kinds of initiatives that sometimes we Americans are timid about, you know, maybe they will seem trite, not worth the investment. You give the citizens the opportunity for that, they'll seize it every time. So we've ended up, this is just a detail. Details are very important. So let me just stop with that and then answer your questions, because I know you all got other things to do. And so, any questions, comments, observations? Yes? How long what?
How long from like the beginning, from when it got restored, did it take? Are you still restoring everything?
Well, there's still some going on, but it's the pendulum has swung, and because you if something's sick, if you get it healthy enough, then it's able to achieve on its own, kind of. So the city putting all the right things into place, it got its own momentum, and so if anything now we're kind of a little tightening, pulling back on the reins a little bit, but it probably took from 75 until probably until the 2005 or 6 just to get momentum. But now it's, you know, places that were just so forlorn and pitiful looking are robust. And then, you know, and then things are working in our favor. The fear of urbanness is no longer exists in America, and so we created it. So we've got lots of housing going and all. So it's it turned the corner a while back. There was a hand up over here. Yeah.
How did you manage to convince all these people to sell the land? Or, because I know a lot of these places were run down, but how did you convince the city just to?
Well, just, you know, you do one at a time, different things. I mean, just people. I say that, you know, what does the mayor do? I say, well, the mayor's in sales. You know, you're just convincing people, and then some of it, you know, some we, with the parking garage, we had the ability to acquire it through eminent domain, and but you gotta, and you sell it. You know, again, you're not hawking. You're telling you why it's important. And then, of course, if you buy someone's property, they deserve to get the fair value of it. And you know, the waterfront park was, we threatened to condemn that, and the owner was a shrewd guy, so he hired somebody from offshore to come up with this plan, and we thought it was worth $1.2 million, and they claimed it was worth $12 million. So I mean, we ended up getting it for $1.2 million, and just got an interesting land swap. So it's, you know, a lot of arm wrestling and communicating. You don't give up. If you're confident that your strategy is correct, and you're confident that your strategy is correct, if you've worked very hard to come up with the right strategy, a business plan, and then you just don't quit. If I didn't achieve what each one of these things, I knew I would be failing the citizens. Failing the citizens now, but failing the citizens 50 years from now. You know, it's just sad that a leader should not be, political leaders should not be worried about the next election as much as the next generation. You know, what you're doing for those you don't know. Yeah, Matthew?
Mayor, every time I talk with our students, especially when we're discussing what they want to do in the future, there's, it seems almost always among younger workers, an element of, I want to do great things in the community and create value for other people. So what are the things that that younger workers and also budding business leaders did during your tenure that endeared them to you? What were the things, oh, thank goodness for that group, because they're willing to help in this particular way?
You know,
What makes a good business citizen, I guess?
there's so many, and it is, just in you asking me that question, I get goosebumps when I think of all that's going on, because that's the real, one of the magical things about our country. And you know, just today I listened to part of President Bush's funeral, and talking about the 1,000 points of light, but America, because we are free, and because we're free, and because government has an important role, but we have an important role too. So the partnerships, the volunteer, sometimes connected government partnerships. So, I just saw, we had an event the last week, and talked to a young person who was a lawyer, and I said, where do you work? And she works at what is now called 180 Place, which we started a shelter for homeless. 4 ministers and I did whenever eons ago. And it is now this thriving nonprofit with all kinds of, fabulous things they do. So we've got, article this morning about the reading partners. We had lots of initiatives working with schools, after-school programs, and conservation initiatives. And I had a professor come see me a long time ago, and he was writing a book about mayors, and so I was all prepared. I had my stats. I could tell him how many jobs were created, and how many this, and how many that, and tax base, and all like that. And he said, Mayor Riley, how many institutions have you participated in forming? And so my first reaction, being a know-it-all, it would be to tell this professor that mayors don't create institutions. But luckily I kept my mouth shut for a minute, and then realized that there were dozens and dozens. In each instance, it was the private sector. Sometimes the mayor can be the leveraging point, or give the publicity, or sometimes help, with some of the early money. And so it's, you don't have to look far. Our community is teeming with opportunities for volunteerism and giving back. Anyone else? Yeah.
You mentioned how it took a while for
Pardon?
it took a while for all these projects to kind of come to fruition, but how long did it take for you and the people that you're working with to really see the fruits of your labors? Like, I gotta believe, as you said that you believed in the mission from day one, but I gotta believe over the long period of time that you were doing this project that there were moments of doubt and scary moments, which you put all this money into this, and what if this doesn't happen?
Well, you're always aware of those possibilities. The important thing is that you be willing to come back and ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? Do you confident it's the right thing to do? And so when you are, you just don't quit. And they some took a long time. The museum is entering its 19th year of our work, and I think we'll begin construction this coming year. And so it just you just don't quit. And sometimes things take longer. But you have to be willing to be honest. Well, maybe this isn't right, and pull the plug or pivot. And sometimes we had this talk all day about stories. So there was this tree on one of our islands, John's Island, angel oak, that is considered to be the oldest oak tree in North America. And the owner, the guy who bought it, who was a real salesman type of guy, said it's the oldest thing, whatever. But it was a huge tree. A huge tree. I can't, and it's called angel oak, and people would go, and it was just kind of in the public domain, but it was privately owned. And then this guy buys it and puts a fence around it like a theme park kind of deal, you know, it's kind of junked it up. And so I proposed in one of my inaugural addresses, you know, every 4 years that the city acquire that through eminent domain, not to tear it down, to give it to the public, you know. Well, he was really clever, and he had me getting whipped beside the face in the public, you know. Riley's getting too big for his britches and all of that and everything. And he was a real, I mean, he was this salesman guy, and he said he just loved things, he loved things that were old. And I was at a reception during a political campaign, not mine, somebody running for office, while all this was going on. And he was there. The guy's my age, or maybe older. He was there, and he had this attractive young woman with him, you know. I mean, at least 30 or 40 years younger than him. And so I said to him, he introduced me to this young woman, and I said, well, his nickname was Speedy. I said, Speedy, I thought you like old things. He said, well, no, not when it comes to women, Joe. But anyway, on that issue, I knew that I was not going to win that in the public. He just had me beat. So I just pulled back and waited. And then, lo and behold, Uncle Sam filed a tax lien on the tree because he was quite in default of his federal income taxes. So I ended up buying the tree from Uncle Sam. So sometimes you just have to take a while and know when to, you just got to ease up.
You know, Mary, you told me in the car ride on the way over, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, that when you first ran, you only intended to serve one term. It kind of goes to John's questions, but there were always more projects to do. So you kept
Yeah, I had never intended, I never thought of being mayor, aspired to be mayor. I was in the state legislature, and but long before you were born, in the South, a big challenge in the South obviously was racial progress. Not that it isn't still a challenge anywhere. And so in 1975, there was going to be a mayor's election. The incumbent was not going to run. And so either there was going to be a white person of moderate political philosophy who connected with the African American community, or there was going to be a white conservative and an African American candidate in pitched battle and be a loser. So I was urged by the African American leadership and the white business leadership to run for mayor. So I'd never been to a city council meeting, but I wanted to serve. And but I told my wife, she said, are you seriously thinking of running for mayor? Because it's a very public legislature. You kind of quiet. The mayor, you know, you're right up there. I mean, you're scrutinized, and your private zone has been diminished. And I said, well, honey, I feel like I have a duty. And she said, you want to? And I said, yeah. I said, but I'm only going to serve one term. We are married 52 years so far, but it's what I had no idea. In the legislature, you propose legislation. So you propose it, and then it's passed, and you've finished. Well, in the mayor's job, you have to execute. So the execution of an idea might take a year, it might take 12 years. So it just so that's why I stuck around a while, because some of these things just took a long time. And they were, you know, it's just whatever you go into, you want to do something that's interesting. And a mayor's job is much like a business activity, because I had, you know, all components of that. And I was the chief executive officer. I had to balance a budget and get a AAA credit rating, and you know, and all of that. But it was just so interesting, because it's interesting to solve problems. When I was in law school, I went to a reception at my father's house there was a banquet that was going after that, and so these business leaders were there. And one was a very prominent lawyer from Beaufort County, and his name was G.G. Dowling. So I was you know, I was in law school, you know, that's not real hard. I mean, you got to study, but it's not, you know, anyway. And I said, well, Mr. Dowling, how do you like practicing law? He said, Joe, I love it. He said, every morning I come to work with new problems to solve. Well, when you're in law school, I mean, you really don't have a lot of problem solving. You know what you got to study, whatever, and what you could do that weekend. But I said, God, he comes to work every day with problems to solve. And, of course, I learned that that's so joyful, to come to work with complicated matters to figure out, and sometimes controversial. So it was, I always wanted to go to work the next morning. And you know, you're working for the citizens, the public, and have a chance to do something worthwhile. So that's why I didn't stop until I knew that after my 10th term, everyone said I would get reelected. I wasn't worried about that. But what you have to do as mayor, and I think head of a big enterprise, is that you have to own the moment, but you have to be willing to own the possibilities, the future. Conceive and anticipate the future. And I didn't want to be in the job so long that I just wasn't robustly seizing the possibilities. So I knew it was time to wrap it up.
Time for maybe one more question. Okay, join me in
Well, I was just saying, what do you consider your greatest success over your 30 years? Like, what's the one thing you look back on and are the most proud of?
Well, first of all, I did nothing alone. I had the best staff. I had great city councils and citizens. So all this, but you know, when I ran for mayor for the reason that I told you, and in the process of all of that and everything else, the city became a city that wasn't divided, and it was a city that everyone felt was theirs, and that the African American community had that sense of ownership, and you know the tragedy that occurred when 9 African Americans were killed in a church in Charleston in 2015. And that was, you know, when a lot of turmoil was going on in the country, and they would be pretty robust activities and whatever, riots or disturbances. And after that happened in our city, and all the anger that anyone could have reasonably felt, and fury, that didn't happen in Charleston. And someone asked me why, and I said, well, I like to think that we had no pockets of alienation. There was no neighborhood that felt that they had not been included, and that all these public spaces and everything, you know, it was a city that everyone owned. So during that time of understandable reason, maybe not ever reason to be violent, but that so I think that's my greatest source of pride, that I feel we created a city that was divided when I started and was together, so that when something tragic like that happened, the response was to not go separately in anger, but to come together and help each other.
Please join me in thanking Mayor Riley for being
Thank
with
you.
us.
Thank you, Matthew.
Well, let me grab this bag over here. So if you're not from the South and haven't been to Charleston, some of you are seniors, but you've still got several months left. Find a time to go to Charleston. Come by my office and I'll circle on a map for you where the best restaurants are, where you can park in the really nice looking parking garages, where the Angel Oak is, anything else you want to see. It'll be a treat and you'll keep coming back. I've kept coming back for 40 years now, and my colleagues are nodding over there. So you've got to do that, okay? Let this inspire you to that, if nothing else. Mayor, we have a gift for you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Well, let me tell you, it was a pleasure to be at this great university and with all you bright-eyed young people, and I wish for all of you great success and happiness in the years to come. And thanks for having me today.
Thanks, everybody.